Chapter 6. Triple Trouble. 1. The sun was high in the sky when William came down to breakfast the next morning. Nobody was in the house. Aunt Edna was in the garden tending her vegetables, Uncle Walter was in his shop, and Elsie had gone out, leaving him a note saying that he could find her later in the library. After making himself some breakfast, William set out for the library. He was surprised not to see Gregor Wattingro as he walked along the street, although he was sure he was hidden somewhere, spying on him as Mr. Grewolf had warned he would. His uncle waved to him as he passed by the antique shop, and William remembered that he had a favor to ask him. Entering the shop, he stood by the window so that he could keep an eye on the square in case Gregor was about. "Good afternoon, William," Uncle Walter greeted him with a chuckle. "I hope you slept well." It must have been obvious from his appearance that he'd only just got up. "Yes, thanks, Uncle Walter. By the way, Elsie said you would be going to Ravenwood Castle to fix the clock someday, and I'd love to go with you if I may." As he spoke, William searched the square for any sign of Gregor, but he was still nowhere to be seen. Uncle Walter threw up his hands and exclaimed, "Heavens above! The grandfather clock at Ravenwood. It's tomorrow. I'd completely forgotten. Just as well you reminded me, William. If you want to come with me, mind you, you'll have to be here at 9:10 tomorrow morning, and not a minute later." William was thrilled that his uncle was letting him go with him to Ravenwood. He was really curious to see the inside of the castle, even more so after what Chris had told him. As Uncle Walter ambled off towards the back of the shop to search for his tools, William spotted Gregor Wattingro on the opposite side of the square pretending to read a newspaper. Leaving the shop, William walked towards him, noting that as he neared him, Gregor raised the newspaper to hide his face. William strolled right past him, as if he had no idea who he was, and headed in the direction of the library. 2. William had never been inside Avonfall Library before. It was a modest sub-library, the main library for the area being located in the neighboring town of Dunfermline. According to the brass nameplate on her desk, the sub-librarian's name was Miss Veronica Agavals. William looked at her curiously as she handed him a new membership form to complete. She was a rather severe-looking woman. With her prim and proper appearance, thin-rimmed glasses, perfectly outlined lips, and her blonde hair worn up in a stiff bun and held in place with lacquer. There was something cold and unforgiving about her, William thought. However, she returned William's greeting in a friendly manner, and gave him a gracious smile as he filled out his name on his new library card. "My dear William Howbler, you may now enjoy our wonderful library. I hope you find a book to your liking. If you need anything in particular, please let me know, and I will do all I can to accommodate your request." William thanked her, surprised at her friendliness. Elsie and Bridget were sitting at the back of the library, and they beckoned William over to join them. "You seem to have made a good impression on Miss Agavals," Elsie whispered into his ear. "She's not usually as friendly as that. It's not easy to get a smile out of her, and she never says a word more than the bare minimum. Normally, it's as if everyone upsets her." Bridget gave Elsie a little kick under the table to silence her. Veronica Agavals was staring at them over the rim of her glasses. Then, clearly unable to contain her excitement any longer, Bridget whispered to William, "We're preparing a play for the Falcon Fair. It's a festival that's held every summer in Avonfall, and it's sponsored by the Night Bird Society. There are various competitions throughout the day, and we're going to go in for the short play competition. It's the most important one, and it's held in the village hall. Chris has written the script, and now we're looking for ideas for costumes." She paused for a moment and then looked at William with a shy smile. "Chris has included you in the script. We wanted it to be a surprise." Bridget looked at Elsie, and they both giggled as quietly as they could. William was taken aback. "I'll have to think about it. I've never acted before, not even in a school play." But you can't say no, Bridget whispered in alarm. Chris wrote the script with you in mind. Elsie was glaring at him. Anyway, she hissed, we'll be in costume and made up, so who's to recognize you? We've loads of time to rehearse too. It's going to be great fun. William had no choice. He realized he'd been well and truly set up. Pleased with their victory, the girls each kissed him on his cheek at the same time, which made him rather uncomfortable. He wondered what his part in the play was going to be, and how Chris had managed to come up with the script in such a short time. But before he could ask about his role, the main door burst open and 3 unruly, rather troublesome-looking boys entered the library. With their light ash-brown hair, blue eyes and prominent noses, the 3 were almost identical to each other, and William surmised that they must be brothers. What they most definitely were not was well-behaved. Rather than being quiet, they appeared to be trying to make as much noise as possible. William wondered that Miss Aggervals, the librarian, had not taken them to task over this, until he realized that she was no longer at her desk. Turning to Elsie and Bridget, he noticed the smiles had disappeared from their faces, and their heads were lowered over their books. Barely moving her lips, Bridget murmured, "Don't look at them, William, please. Just pretend you're reading." Seeing how upset the girls were, William did as Bridget asked, shifting closer towards her as if he was reading her book since he hadn't got one himself. There was a tense, awkward silence as they pretended to concentrate on their reading. Even with his head down, William sensed the gaze of the 3 brothers on them. He felt uncomfortable and thought it was ridiculous that they should be acting like that for fear of these 3 boys. Elsie, who seemed to have sensed that William was struggling to control himself, muttered, "Please, William, don't look at them. Pretend they're not there." But William had had enough of this farce. Raising his head, he met their eyes. The 3 of them were standing near the librarian's desk, staring at him defiantly. One of the boys, the ringleader, William thought, sauntered towards them. "Hi girls," he smirked at Bridget and Elsie. "I see you've got yourselves a new little friend. Aren't you going to introduce him to us?" The 2 girls remained motionless, acting as if they hadn't heard him. William, however, stared back at him, angry at the way he'd spoken. The boy leaned forward, his hands on the table in front of William in a provocative gesture. "Didn't any of you hear me then?" Elsie grabbed William's wrist to stop him standing up. He looked furiously at the youth, who gave him another annoying smirk. They tried to outstare each other for a few tense moments, when all of a sudden the other boy screwed up his face and groaned in pain. The librarian, Miss Aggervals, had crept up behind him, and was giving his ear a good sharp twist as she marched him to the library door. "Tom Aggervals, I'm not going to put up with this behavior either in the library or outside it," she warned. "Have I made myself clear? Now off home with you this instant. Pat. Jack, you too." Miss Aggervals gestured at the other 2 boys, who were looking every bit as terrified as Tom. "I shall deal with you all later." Tom Aggervals ran off holding his ear, his 2 brothers close behind him. To William and the girls' surprise, Veronica Aggervals came over to their table and smiled at them sweetly. "I must apologize for my nephew's appalling behavior," she said. "If they bother you again, please let me know, and I assure you I'll take harsher measures." After seeing the look of pain on Tom's face, William couldn't even begin to imagine how much harsher the measures might be. "Boy, that must have hurt," Elsie muttered as Miss Aggervals returned to her desk. "They're her nephews," William said. Bridget nodded, smiling at the incredulous look on William's face. "Her brother's children," she whispered. "Their parents are in the United States, and the triplets were born there." "What are they doing here, then?" William asked. "You mean other than causing trouble and generally making a nuisance of themselves?" Elsie retorted. "They go to St. Elm's," Bridget explained. "There's no chance they'll be in my class at St. Elm's, is there?" "Don't worry, they're a year older than us." Calm returned to the library, and William suddenly wondered where Chris was. "We're meeting him at 12 o'clock in Malcanaries," Elsie said. to talk about the play and have an ice cream. I bet that's where those three like to hang out, said William. Bridget hastened to reassure him. They won't dare approach when they see Chris, she said with pride in her voice. At the beginning of last school year, he gave them a good hiding. 2 of them went for him one day after school, but he took them both on. They've steered clear of him since then. Elsie picked up her books and stood up. Let's go, she said rather loudly, eliciting a sharp glare from Miss Aggarvall's. It's almost 12 and Chris will be waiting. 3. Malcanary's coffee shop was at the other end of the village square to the library. As they walked along, William cast a look around but failed to spot Gregor Wattingro, although his motorcycle and sidecar was parked in full view, so he wasn't far off. Seeing the sidecar gave William an idea how to prevent Gregor from following him to his rendezvous with Mr. Greewolf. He would need Chris's help and had no choice but to trust him to be discreet. But even though he'd only known Chris a short while, he felt sure he could count on him. At the entrance to Malcanary's, Elsie and Bridget met the Arinduff sisters Gladys and Arlene, coming out of the shop, and stopped to chat to them. William was pleased. It would give him an opportunity to have a word alone with Chris. He got straight to the point as soon as he sat down. I've got a problem, Chris, and I need you to help me out if you can. If you agree, I'm afraid you'll have to go along with what I say, no questions asked. It's all rather complicated to explain. Chris didn't bat an eyelid. Go ahead. What do you want me to do? William pointed discreetly out the window across the square, to where Gregor Wattingro's sidecar was parked. You see that sidecar? I need you to pour water into the petrol tank. I'll be here at 2 o'clock tomorrow, and I'll leave my bike in the center of the square. Then I'll set off walking down Chestnut close towards the jetty. Sorry to butt in, but it's such a narrow alleyway that hardly anyone goes down it. Which is precisely why I've chosen it, replied William. He'll have to follow me on foot. Don't worry, Chris, I've thought this through. When I get into the alley, I'll start to run fast and then I'll double back via High Street. It won't take me more than a few minutes to get to the jetty and back. That's all the time you'll have to do the job. Chris had been listening attentively. No problem, William. I'll have it done in under a minute. You can count on me. Not a word about this to anyone, please. Trust me, William, Chris replied. Mum's the word. William stared as Chris grabbed the menu from its holder on the table and began to study it as though his life depended on it. He looked up to see Elsie making her way towards them with a suspicious look on her face. What are you two up to? She asked, as she and Bridget sat down beside them. William grinned at Chris, whose face was now bright red. Do you fancy a vanilla cone?